quorum yet. They'll be in just a moment, but we're going to start the hearing on Senate Bill 293 we had left from yesterday. It's creating the transparency in revenues underwriting the Elections Act to criminalize the receipt and expenditure of private money by election officials. So we will have a staff briefing. And Jason, are you there?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Senate Bill 293 would add a new section of law to the election statutes that would prohibit election officials from accepting any monies or any other thing of value from a person to be used for expenditures related to conducting, funding, or otherwise facilitating the administration of an election pursuant to law. The only monies that the election official could use would be monies provided through acts of appropriation as otherwise provided by law. They could not receive grants or gifts or donations of monies for those expenditures. To do so would be a severity level 9 non-person felony. The provisions wouldn't apply to monies collected by an election official from the payment of fees or assessed costs that are required by law. So that would not be a violation of the new section. And I will just point out for the committee, if it intends to work this bill, it was brought to my attention after the bill was printed that KSA 25-608, which is referenced in line 23 of the bill, is actually an older statute that has essentially been superseded by a newer enactment. And so if the committee decides to work the bill, our office would recommend simply striking that reference to that statute in lines 22 and 23, and perhaps even repealing 25-608 because it has been superseded by a more recent enactment of statute. And I have a balloon to that effect if the committee decides to work 293. With that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jason. Are there questions? Senator Faust-Godot.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Jason, I think I understand, but give me a real life example of receiving funds and using those funds as this bill.
For example, if a nonprofit organization wanted to make a grant donation to the Sedgwick County election office to help them in offsetting the cost of running the election in 2022, this bill would prohibit that office and those officials from accepting that private nonprofit grant money to do so.
Mr. Chairman, Jason, is that currently happening?
I think there were some incidences recently in which, yes, private grant money was offered and potentially received by election offices to offset the cost of running those elections. That's my understanding. I can definitely verify that if the committee would like me to.
Are there any further questions for Jason? Seeing none, thank you, Jason. Our first proponent is Mr. Stephen Green of Opportunity Solutions Project. Welcome, Stephen.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair and the committee for the opportunity to provide proponent testimony for Senate Bill 293. I represent or on behalf of Opportunity Solutions Project, which is a nonprofit that advocates for state and federal policies that promote and advance free and fair elections. This is a short bill, and I say that in earnest. When you see one page, that's always nice to see that on your desk. But I'm going to read specifically from Section C, lines 15 through 19 of what Senate Bill 293 would do. It says this: no election official shall knowingly accept or expend any monies or any other thing of value directly or indirectly from any person except as provided in any acts of appropriation or as otherwise provided by law for any expenditures related to conduct, funding, or otherwise facilitating the administration of an election pursuant to law. So why are we bringing this bill, or why do we think this bill is important today? To earlier questions, I think I'll refer, and Jason will, and the reviser will probably provide that information, but there was an article in the Wichita Eagle about, I think, Sedgwick County specifically receiving grants from a third-party entity in before the 2020 elections. There have been issues with funding specifically from Mark and Chan Zuckerberg's foundation, which invested about $400 million into elections around the country. That's approximate. And research has shown that those contributions have come with significant strings attached. In some circumstances, the funds came with the requirement that mentors be involved in the election administration process and given unprecedented access to the election process in different states. These mentors were not necessarily even familiar with local or state election laws, and when they were operating, and elected officials noted significant political bent to the help being provided. My testimony provides a couple examples in the footnotes that I would reference, but for one, just recently that's been coming out is out of Brown County in Wisconsin. The former Broward County Clerk Sandy Juneau addressed the Wisconsin Assembly Committee on Campaigns and Elections, noting that there were significant concerns with the process, specifically with the grants that were used to help sort of supplement the election process there in Wisconsin. I would just point out that one of the most important aspects of the election process with amongst citizens in Kansas is that they understand that and they must have faith that the results that they're providing have been fair and they can trust the process. When you cast a ballot, you assume that there's going to be not only transparency, but that there's a sense of integrity in that process. And so it's really important that you all consider Senate Bill 293. In closing, in America and in Kansas, we have signed our elections to be operated by local government entities based upon the laws passed in state legislature across the country. Third-party our elections, regardless of the entity's agenda, is a threat to the very core of our democracy. And I just want to thank you for the opportunity to provide proponent testimony and would be glad to answer any questions the committee may have. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Senator Falscadeau.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Green, tell me, so that everybody's clear on this. So you're talking about grant monies being given to the election commissioner's office, not to candidates or not to a particular party, but to the election office. Is that because, I mean, I live in Cedric County and it's a large county. And so is it due to they are not getting enough money for that commission to do what they need to do? I mean, so if you need some extra help, that makes sense to me that they would take extra help to send out all the advance ballots and do all the extra stuff that everybody is asking for them to do. So is it because they don't have enough money to work with?
Chairman, and Senator Falscadeau, that's a great question. I appreciate the question because I think it really gets to the root of why we're bringing the bill forward. I can't speak to sort of the amount that is allocated for each county. But what I can say, in just my experience of working in state agencies, is that often grants do come with the expectation of certain strings attached to it. And that the devil is often in the details. And so, and I'll refer back to the testimony of the examples that were in Wisconsin, in which the grants were provided, but where there were certain expectations with the grant. It wasn't just, hey, we're going to give you $400,000 and you can do it for however you want with it. It was with certain conditions and even certain performance metrics or outputs that were titled. And so for us, in our position, is that when it comes to the election process, that's not really the place for those types of grants to be used. And so that's the sort of the crux of why we're for this bill and think it's important.
Any other questions? Yes, Senator Reichman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for coming. One of the things you said that there's one group that they spent over $400 million, and then you said there are strings attached, and you gave some examples. Are any other examples what we're talking about that why you are concerned with this type of situation? Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Senator. I appreciate that. Also is a great question. And the investigation that I highlighted, and I'll be happy to send that as a link to the committee, highlights probably 5 to 8 different sort of strings. One was the mentors that were involved in the election. The other one that they talked about specifically was having access to sort of curing the ballots in Wisconsin. And so I don't have that. I should have that exhaustive list, and I apologize for not having it, but I'll be happy to provide some more specific examples for you.
Okay. Further questions? Yes, Senator Falscadeau.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So you keep referencing another state, Wisconsin. So is this legislation to prevent this from happening here, or can you cite something that's happened here? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Falscadeau. I appreciate that question. Again, I know that there was an article in the Wichita Eagle that talked about sort of the allocation of funds that went to certain counties. I think Sedgwick County may have received an allocation from a third party in the recent elections. But that's the most notable example, and it's most recent that's come out as far as articles are concerned, and that's why it's referenced in the testimony.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. We have anybody else for proponent that wants to testify? Seeing none, moving on to opponents. Davis Hamlet with the Loud Light Civic Action Group. Davis, are you online?
Yes, I am, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman Alley, members of the committee. First off, there's actually right now, the Kansas legislature is having the legislative post-audit division do an audit on this exact topic. And that was based on the on Senator Tyson introduced it, saying there was some concerns about strings being attached to this. So there is right now, y'all are paying for an investigation into this. And so with that being said, I would, I guess, just urge kind of restraint until you get the report on that, so you can see if there actually was any strings attached or not. Because right now, this bill is based on accusations and allegations of things that happened in other states. So the unintended scope of this bill, as I was reading it, is very concerning. Particularly, it doesn't just say grants or money, it says anything of value. So this means it would become illegal for volunteers to help with any part of the election process. It would become illegal for an organization or a company to donate a polling place to an election office. And even it's written so broadly that it could have an unforeseen application where if the county election office, or for example, the county clerk in most of the Kansas counties, if some division in that office receives grant funding, it might be illegal for the county clerk to be housed in that same office. The reason that all of this is especially concerning is because these sort of partnerships are extremely common across a variety of public services. Right now, the Senate is considering a bill to actually lift the cap on how much people can donate or grants can be given to schools. We know that public parks often receives grants or private donations to supplement them. Hospitals do. These are extremely common practices for some sort of public charity to provide a grant to supplement government services. The other thing to consider here is that the state does not provide any election funding. The state sometimes funnels through federal money for elections, but the counties actually provide all this election money while the state mandates many of the election laws. So essentially this bill would be the state legislature creating restrictions on local funding options while it continues to issue unfunded government mandates on local counties. If the committee does move forward with this bill, again, I would recommend waiting to actually see what that audit shows. But then the committee should consider that if it is tying the hands of local government, then it should provide supplemental funding to make up for that, to make sure that there's enough funding to make any grant completely obsolete. So with that, I'm happy to stand for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Senator Ware.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Davis, I didn't realize that there was so much that happens essentially nearly every day for many different government entities. I kind of thought the government took care of itself, but maybe not, huh? Okay, well, thank you so much.
Thank
Senator
you.
Hildebrand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Davis, thank you for your testimony. Just a quick couple of questions. You said something about unfunded government mandates by not allowing them to take outside grants from individuals. Can you explain how not accepting money is an unfunded mandate?
Sure. Thank you for that question. So I actually mean those as two separate things. For example, with the bill that we were discussing yesterday for limiting ballots, which would require ballot-assisted returns, which would require the county election office to take on additional expensive security measures and potentially hire additional staff. And that's just one example. Virtually all these state election laws are, because the state does not provide any funding, any of the measures that the state legislature passes that cost the county money for elections are unfunded mandates, because the county commission has to fund the county operations without any supplemental state aid. And so I meant that the state legislature continues to pass unfunded mandates. And then in this case, you would also be removing one of the options to receive funding to help some counties address those mandates. And an example would be, for example, if someone used grant fundings to help get a machine to expedite signature match process or improve their signature matching process, that is a state mandate, the signature match, but the counties have to pay for the staff or equipment to do that signature match, with which these grants could potentially supplement.
Okay, Davis, thank you for clarifying that. This bill indeed does not cause an unfunded mandate. I appreciate that clarification. Going back to my commissioner days when I was a county commissioner for a little over 7 years, we dealt an awful lot with funding for elections. Just to give some of my colleagues that have not ever been a part of that process, you don't have a large election every year. The largest cost is your presidential election. That's once every 4 years. A county election budget is usually based off of that 1 year. They don't go back and cut year 2, year 3, or year 4. Now, year 2 or 3, the gubernatorial, that will be your second highest one. But your off years are very, very small, and you don't cut their budgets. That money keeps accumulating. So they have that money to offset. Very rarely do you ever find an instance where you have to go out and beg for money or grants, because that money's already in there, because you're accumulating it up for that 4th year. I'm sure some counties don't do it that way, but that's the way we always did it, and that always seemed to make sense. The second part is you said something about using a polling place would be considered a gift in statute, and I could be wrong. I wished we had someone from Secretary of State here, but if my memory is correct, the polling officer says where that polling place would be, and they have that option. So whether they get a monetary thing or not, that's already in statute that they have that opportunity. I don't believe that this bill would, the way it is written, would interfere with that. So I just wanted to give my colleagues a little bit of information. Thank you.
Are there any further questions, discussion? Thank you very much, Davis. We appreciate that. We do have an opposition by Dr. Glenda Overstreet Vaughn, with the Political Action Chair of the NAACP Kansas State Conference, and that is in your packet. So with that, we will close the hearing on 293 unless there's any other comments. Seeing none, close it, and we'll open some of the other bills that we have worked previously and heard previously. We would like to open House Bill 2138. House Bill 2138, as you remember, allows a alcoholic liquor manufacturer to obtain a drinking establishment license under certain conditions. Are there any questions? Yes, Senator Hildebrand.
Mr. Chairman, if memory serves me right, there's an amendment on this, so if I do remember right, I could be wrong, but with that, I would just make a motion that we would work House Bill 2138, so we can put an amendment on.
With the amendment on it?
No, so we can put an amendment on there.
Okay, we do have an amendment. Motion to work it without the amendment? We are going to work House Bill 2138. That's the motion. Do I have a second? I have a second by Senator Longbine. All in favor? Aye. We will work House Bill 2138. And do we have an amendment? I think there is one coming. Jason, could you give us a briefing on the amendment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, as you recall, House Bill 2138 did make an exception to the general prohibition for a license if your spouse is employed as a law enforcement official. Under the bill, that's just a blanket exception. The amendment you can see on page 2 would limit that so that the exception only applies if the spouse is a law enforcement officer in a county other than the county in which the premises for which a license is sought. So for instance, if the application for the license is for a premises located in Sedgwick County and the spouse is a law enforcement officer in Sedgwick County, then the exception would not apply and the license would be denied. However, if the spouse was a law enforcement officer in, say, Andover County, or over in Andover, then the exception would apply and the license could be issued to the applicant because their spouse was a law enforcement officer in another county.
Are there any questions? Senator Falscadeau.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just for clarification, so the license would be given to the spouse or to the other spouse who is the law enforcement, and would it be just a general license to do what this bill wants, or to open a separate or have a license to sell and open a separate store?
Jason, can you give us an explanation on that?
Yeah, the prohibition against a law enforcement officer having a license remains unchanged under the bill or the balloon. So a law enforcement officer could not obtain a license for a liquor establishment or a club and drinking establishment. This is the general prohibition against your spouse being a law enforcement officer. So you, the applicant, are applying for the license, but your spouse is a law enforcement officer. This bill and the balloon would grant an exception so that even though your spouse is a law enforcement officer, you, the applicant, could still obtain a license. And this would be a license you're applying for under the Liquor Control Act or the Club and Drinking Establishment Act. But you, the applicant, would receive the license, not your spouse, because law enforcement officers would still be prohibited from holding the license.
Any other questions on this? Yes, Senator Ware.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a comment. This was a bill that I did have some problems with, but this amendment, whoever put it together was a very wise person that took care of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions on House Bill 238 out of the amendment? Seeing none, what is your wishes? Senator Hildebrand?
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we pass the amendment, or approve the amendment for House Bill 2138.
Do we have a second? We have a second by Senator Peterson. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We will hold House Bill 238 for final action. Now we'll work House Bill 2137. 2137. Jason, could you give us a briefing on 2137?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, if you recall, House Bill 2137 was the bill that would authorize clubs and drinking establishments under the Club and Drinking Establishment Act to sell and serve cereal malt beverages. And then there was additionally the amendment added by the House on pages 22 and 23 of the bill to authorize those same licensees to sell alcoholic liquor and cereal malt beverage in the original unopened container, with the beer and the CMB and the wine being not subject to the individual drink size requirements of the Act, but all such alcoholic liquor and cereal malt beverage has to be removed from the premises by 11 p.m.
Any questions of Jason? Not? Committee, what is your wishes? Senator Hildebrand has made the motion. We have a second by Senator Longbaum. We work House Bill 2137. I understand there is an amendment. Yes, Senator.
I wasn't here when we worked that bill. Was there any opponents to this bill, or is there any concerns at all on it? Thank you.
I don't see any opponents. There was no opponents that testified. Thank you. Okay, we have a motion to work 2137. All in favor? Say aye. Aye. Okay, and we do have an amendment. Jason, while they're handing that out, could you give us a briefing on that, please?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, this balloon amendment would amend that section that was amended by the House to make it a bit more consistent and uniform in its application to these clubs and drinking establishments that are going to allow original unopened containers to be removed from the licensed premises. Instead of having multiple subsections, the balloon puts all the provisions essentially back into subsection A. And so you see amendments there in lines 15 and 16 so that patrons of the club or drinking establishment could remove alcoholic liquor and CMB from the premises in one or more containers that include original unopened containers, subject to the conditions you see listed below. It must be legal for the licensee to sell the liquor. Each container must have been purchased by the patron. There must be a dated receipt provided to the patron for the alcoholic liquor or cereal malt beverage that is being purchased. The container must be resealed, and any open containers have to be placed in a tamper-proof transparent bag that's sealed so that it's visible that the bag has been tampered with. Additional requirements on this would be you cannot remove original unopened containers of spirits, that's hard liquor, and that no containers can be removed after 11 p.m. unless alcoholic liquor is wine that was purchased and partially consumed on the licensed premises. And so this would take care of the original unopened container provisions that were added by the House under subsection B. And so you see those lines being stricken from the bill. And then in addition to that, the last page of the bill would be amended so that this would go into effect on publication in the Kansas Register, because we do have the sunset date of March 31st, 2021. That's currently in law, would be stricken under this balloon amendment and under the bill. And so the earlier effective date is to an attempt to get the bill effective before that sunset takes effect.
Thank you, Jason. Are there any questions? Senator Faust-Cadeau.
Mr. Chairman, is this the amendment that would fix the concern during, in the hearing? I think Amy and Scott does this fix their situation?
Jason?
Yes, this balloon amendment was drafted with cooperation from Scott Schneider and Amy Campbell and Director Beavers.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? At this time, I'm going to turn this over to Senator Hildebrand. And Jason, I'm going to call you offline. I'll be right out. Thank you.
Is there any further questions on the amendment? Okay, seeing none, all those, do we have a motion? I have a motion by Senator Longbine and a second by Senator Faust-Cadeau to move the amendment. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. That motion is carried. And we will hold until the chairman makes it back. Senator Faust-Cadeau.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say happy St. Patrick's Day.
Yes. That was what we intended. I'll entertain a motion for that. Second. Motion been made and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you. The next bill we'll be working will be Senate Bill 257. And Jason, if you would, give us a briefing on 257.
Mr. Chairman, staff did not hear that last motion that was made and adopted by the committee. The mics were not turned on.
I'm sorry, that was probably me or, okay. Would you repeat your motion there, Senator Peterson?
My motion was to remove the contents of 2138 as amended and place them into 2137.
Okay.
And the second was Senator Hildebrand. And we did pass that. So we are now working Senate Bill 257.
Okay, and Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Senate Bill 257, as you recall, was the bill to authorize retail liquor stores and clubs and drinking establishments to sell what are commonly known as growlers, subject to the volume limitations and the labeling requirements, which are similar to those required of microbreweries under current law.
Any questions? Do we have any amendments? Well, we want to work the, first of all, we want to work this bill, intend it. We have a motion to work the bill by Senator Hildebrand, second by Faust-Cadeau, Senator Faust-Cadeau. All in favor? Aye. Thank you. We do have an amendment. Jason, you want to explain your amendment? The amendment, not your amendment.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, the amendment that's being passed out right now is more of a technical amendment to Senate Bill 257 that was pointed out by the director. There is a statute 41-718 that currently would prohibit the sale of beer in a container other than the original package. And so the amendment appears on page 2 to simply make an exception to that general prohibition so that it would not apply to the sale of beer, domestic beer, or cereal malt beverage by a retailer who is selling in accordance with 41-308C7.
Are there any questions? Jason? Thank you, Jason. We would entertain a motion to approve the amendment. Motion been made by Senator Longbine. Do I have a second? Second by Senator Dietrich. All in favor? Aye. Thank you. Motion passes. We will hold on Senate Bill 257. Moving on to Senate Bill 253. Jason, could you give us a briefing on 253?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Senate Bill 253 was the bill making amendments regarding the shipment and receipt of bulk wine by farm wineries. Those amendments are on page 2 to allow that. This is all pursuant to the farm wineries TTB permit that they have to obtain in order to carry out these actions under federal law. The amendment also makes amendments to the packaging warehousing facility permit statute on pages 4 and 5 to allow the receipt of bulk alcoholic liquor from a manufacturer or supplier for the purposes of packaging that liquor in cans and bottles. And the bill will go into effect on July 1st.
Are there any questions on this? Any questions? Yes. Senator Longbottom?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have been told that maybe there was an amendment that was left at the altar on this one, and wondered if the chairman would consider a simple conceptual amendment.
I think a simple conceptual amendment would be in order.
Well, if that's the case, then I'm going to call on the greatest liquor attorney in the world to explain the amendment.
I have heard he's, I have heard he's been called up before. Turn your mic on, and you might
Not sure I
introduce
want anybody
yourself.
to hear what I have to say.
If you'd introduce yourself,
I will.
please.
I'll do that again. Tuck Duncan, attorney. When we drafted this, we left out three little words in the canning section. The director pointed it out in her testimony that we need to add in that line. I've texted this to Jason. On page 4, line 27, we would add any manufacturer, supplier, farm winery, micro distillery, or microbrewery. So that would then make sure that the farm wineries, the micro distilleries, and the microbreweries in Kansas would be able to use this canning facility.
Okay. Any discussion on the conceptual amendment? Entertain a motion to approve. Motion approved by Senator Longbottom. Do I have a second? Second by Senator Peterson. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion, the conceptual amendment has been adopted. Okay, we're on the, back on the bill. Do we have another amendment? And if you would pass that out. Jason, could you give us a update on this amendment, please?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, the balloon that's being handed out right now would have been 253. On page 3, by striking the requirement that at least 30% of the product utilized by a farm winery to manufacture wine be grown in Kansas. There is currently an exception for a lesser proportion as authorized by the director, but that requirement would be stricken in its entirety. And then a similar amendment would be to 41-308B, which would be added to the bill. That's on page 3 of the attachment to strike the same 30% Kansas grown product requirement from some subsection C and with respect to the microbreweries.
Thank you. Are there any questions, Jason, on this? Yes, Senator Felskadell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So who brought forth this amendment? I mean, we keep saying Jason, but who actually? Because I back in the day, we were really advocating for this to be grown here in Kansas. So what's the reason?
Right. The reason, in my understanding, is we have some microbreweries that are in Kansas today, some of them around Wichita, and they have the ones that requested this amendment be brought to one. I'll give you the one example that is the one down by Mulvane, the elderberry wine is one example of those.
Because we're not growing
They'd like to bring
enough.
more product in and use it in.
And so the percentage, Jason, if you could share that percentage again?
Yes, the percentage has been reduced over the years through other statutory enactments. It currently sits at 30% of the products used in the manufacture of wine or the beer, in the case of the microbrewery, must be grown in Kansas.
Senator Reichman, did you have a question?
Thank you. I think he might have clarified it. Again, I wasn't here when you ran the bill, and I'm trying to wrap my hands around this. So before it said that 30% had to be produced here in Kansas. now it's less, you can bring more from other state in there. Is that what this means? Thank you.
Yes, the balloon, current law requires at least 30% be grown in Kansas. Under this balloon, there would be no requirement that any Kansas-grown product be used in the production of wine or beer by a farm winery or a microbrewery.
Thank you. Any further questions on the amendment? Do I hear a motion to approve? Motion been made by Senator Longbine. Do I have a second? Second by Senator Ware. All in favor of the amendment being added to 253, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. 253 has been amended. We do have a request, and Senator Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you know, earlier, we just gutted out 2138. I would like to ensure that we remove the contents of 2138 and insert 2157 as amended, the contents of Senate Bill 255 and 256, and create a substitute bill.
Is there any questions on the request?
Removing the contents of 2138, inserting 257 as amended, and the contents of 256 and 255, and create a substitute bill.
Any further discussion? Do we have a second on his motion? Do we have a second? Motion been made by Senator Peterson, second by Senator Longbine, that we remove the contents of 2138 and insert Senate Bill 55, 255, 256, and 257 as amended. Is there any comment? All in favor? Say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you very much. Now we have a request, and Senator Hildebrand, do you have a...
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to work House Bill 2252, and I make that as a motion.
2252 has been made as a motion. Do we have a second? Second by Senator Peterson. You have a 2252. Jason, could you give us a brief briefing on that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, House Bill 2252 was the House version of the fulfillment license bill. This would require fulfillment houses, those entities that fulfill shipping orders from outside of the state wineries who are shipping wine directly to consumers in Kansas. Those entities providing those services would have to obtain a permit for each facility that was conducting those activities, and that fee would be $100, or I believe it was $100. Oh, I'm sorry. The amendment was to reduce it to $50 for each facility permit at each location. And these are primarily just to service the special order shipping permit holders who are shipping wine directly to consumers in Kansas.
Any questions on the bill? And do you have a further information on that?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to insert Senate Bill 253, that is the farm winery bill that we just worked. Senate Bill 258, that's the special order shipping license bill. House Bill 2212, that is the eliminating the Kansas residency requirement for a license. And House Bill 2057, allowing a manufacturer to have an establishment license, and put the contents of all those four bills into House Bill 2252 and make that a Senate substitute for House Bill 2252, and that we would pass that out.
253 as amended?
Yes, 253 as amended, as we worked it, yes.
Thank you. Do I have a second on that bill? On that amendment? Do we have a second? Seconded by Senator Falscadeau. Is there any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. And I think we have done enough today, Hal. Okay, Senator Falscadeau.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If our dear Connie would be so kind as to email us or put together the shells and bills, I appreciate it.
That will probably be in there. And Senator Longbine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and this may be totally intentional, but do you realize that your three bills that you've created here have not been passed out favorably?
That was,
Only one of them has been passed out. 2138 has not been passed out.
okay, we probably ought to work 2138 if we're not done yet. Thank you very much.
Go back and check and make sure that we have actually taken final action on the substitute bills that you've created.
The substitute bill that we created for 2138, we put contents of, in 2138 of Senate Bill 255, 256, and 257 as amended.
Right, but have you had a motion to pass that out favorably to the floor?
It has been worked. It was not a substitute motion. We made a motion to work it and make it a substitute bill. It needs to be passed out. With that, I would move that we pass out Senate substitute for House Bill 2138 as amended, favorable for passage.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Second, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Is there a need to do the same thing on 2252? I think we did that.
Mr. Chairman, I probably made the wrong motion. I did it all in one, said to pass it out favorably as amended with adding those. So we probably ought to, just for clarification, go back and, since we have put that amendment in, make a new motion to pass out Senate substitute for House Bill 22 favorably for passage.
Second.
Second has been made. All in favor? Any discussion first? All in favor? Say aye. Thank you very much. We appreciate your work today. I know this was kind of confusing, but it's necessary. So thank you very much. And the committee is adjourned.